Boom, boom. Welcome to Coffee with Ryan. Good morning, everybody. Let's see here. How's everybody doing? Pull up the chat. Here we go. Make sure the audio is turned down. And we are live. How's it going, everybody? Today I just wanted to spend an hour or so on here and do a bit of a meaningful hangout. So that means we can essentially talk about anything you want, and we'll just keep it around how to live a meaningful life, what is meaningful to you, what's meaningful to us. Hey, Michael, good to see you, man. What do you want to talk about today? Shout anything out. I'm just here to hang out with everyone for a bit, whoever can make it, and we'll see where it goes. I have a bit of a lower energy this morning, so forgive me if the entertainment factor is a little lower. However, I think if we all work together here in the chat, we can come up with something interesting. So let's see here, make sure everything's working. I had a great weekend. I went over to Dr. Strachan's house in Buena Vista, Colorado, and we did a series of interviews that are designed to further the inquiry that we've been exploring as far as his model. Hey, Thomas, good to see you. What do you want to talk about today? I am an open book where basically anything pertaining to meaningful living is a fair game. So I'm going to address anything within that spectrum. Anyways, Dr. Strachan and I spent some time together, and it was fantastic. It was really nice to see him and spend a day filming with him. You know, one of the things that he continues to maintain is that I've always struggled with is that there's no such thing as unconscious, that everything is different types of consciousness, which I've continued to try to wrap my mind around. The word unconscious is something that is used in a couple different ways. One way that it's used is as automatic neurophysiological functioning. Another way that it's used is in psychology as a place within yourself that you are unaware of. The problem is, how do you define you, right? You are, as a collection of many different subpersonalities, which one is you? So who's unaware of what? And is consciousness limited to specific aspects of your forebrain, or is it running throughout your entire being and autonomous within itself? And it's not that it's unconscious, it's that it's different types of consciousness either working together or contradicting one another. It's a very complicated subject, but within the topic of panpsychism, which is the theory that consciousness is running through everything, it does make sense. Within the topic of if you think that consciousness is only available to certain species or certain aspects of being human, and the rest of us is quote unquote unconscious, then it's a mess. It's going to take me a while to untangle it, but yeah, he continues to maintain that position. And yeah, so we continued. We talked about that a little bit in the interview. What's going on, Grizz? Okay, Michael says, topic. You call the topic. This chat over blaring RHCP. Mind is on defunct and skateboarding now. Got it. So you just want to listen. You don't want to come up with a topic. Well, if anybody else has a topic, feel free to ask any questions you want and to talk about whatever's on your mind. So yeah, let's just continue to see what's going on here. Yeah, so I'll keep going with this idea of consciousness. And if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about something else, then feel free. Yeah, so the thing I'm struggling with is that, okay, so if we think that everything is conscious, then that means that there's no such thing as unconscious, that it's just different types of consciousness. So certain aspects of consciousness and awareness come in and out of the forefront of having presence within the body mind, which means that just because there's something that's not in the forefront doesn't make it unconscious. It just means that it's consciousness doing something else that the current forefront isn't aware of. The current center of being isn't apprehending, I guess you could say. But, anyways, I have to do some more research to really wrap my mind around it, because obviously a lot of the psychoanalysts, Carl Jung, people who have been in the field of psychology haven't maintained the word unconscious for quite some time. So, yes. Boom, boom. Okay, we've got 2 comments. We've got Thomas Welch. I started a new job recently, starting new things with this topic. That's great. Yeah, I can address that for sure. Another comment. I'm a believer of the collective unconscious and the interrelated nature of everything. As Peterson says, I'm not willing to dismiss the mysterious. There have been many serendipitous moments for me. Yeah, I am in the same boat as far as the interconnected nature of all things, the collective psyche. The question is the word unconscious actually the right word? Or is it time to discard that word and realize that it's not that it's unconscious, it's that it's varied forms of consciousness that have different levels of manifestation and being, that we use the word unconscious to explain because we don't understand it as conceptually and intellectually as we'd like to, so we use the word unconscious. What if it was just a different form of consciousness, a mysterious form of being that the me that I call myself doesn't fully understand, but then I call it unconscious because it's in relationship to me as a person. I'm not fully understanding it or aware of it, so I call it unconscious. But if you look at the thing in of itself, is it unconscious? Or is it just a separate form of consciousness? That's the question. I'm not saying I have an answer. I'm just saying Dr. Strachan's inquiry has led me down that line of thinking, and I'm very interested in exploring it and deciding for myself whether the word unconscious is something that I want to continue using. Because after all, I am studying Jungian studies and depth psychology in graduate school. So, I'm familiar with these topics, and I do use the word unconscious in research papers and things like that, or even on this YouTube channel, I've used it from time to time. Sometimes in exploring the brain anatomy, other times in exploring the nature of the collective, such as you mentioned, David. So, yes, yeah, it's a big thing. Thomas. Oh, I got to address Thomas. So starting new things as a topic. Well, yeah, I mean, it's so broad. I mean, but yeah, I think one of the cool things about starting a new job or a new chapter in life is your perceptual circuits just absolutely transform. Your experience of life changes. It's kind of like going on a pilgrimage. If you travel, you find that different parts of you turn on. It's kind of what Dr. Peterson talks about rescuing your father from the belly of the whale. When you go on that hero's journey, when you venture into the unknown, different parts of your genes get turned on. And he talked about that. That's what that he discovered. That's what it means to rescue your father from the belly of the whale, because you're essentially reviving a genetic code from your ancestry that's allowing you to explore a new circuitry of being that you haven't activated insofar or as much in your life as of yet. So that's pretty awesome. So you do something new, it activates different parts of you, maybe separate sub-personalities come to the forefront, and you realize, oh, I didn't realize I had this deep connection to this particular way of being until I started doing it, and all of a sudden it just turned on. I'll give you an example. For a while I lived in northern Idaho. Lots of hunting and things go on out there, and it's a very nature savvy place. And I was practicing survival skills. I was training with this particular method, and it included some shamanic stuff as well as mostly working deeply within the framework of using your hands, going out into nature, learning how to track, learning how to build shelters, learning how to build primitive fires, things like that. And we ended up tanning a deer. So we gutted it, pulled the guts out, peeled the skin off, the hide off, excuse me, and did I really just forget where the fuck I was going with that? I had such a good point to make. That is not good, guys. That's a brain failure. Okay, I'm gonna think of it. Dear. Oh yes. Okay, there we go. I got so like caught up in my memories. I haven't thought about that in so long. Okay, so then we started butchering the meat because we were gonna freeze all the meat and then we were gonna tan the hide and save it and all that. So I started, cutting the meat off of the bones and taking it away from the skeletal structure and storing it in our bags or whatever. And I swear to God, it felt like I had done it before. That was the first time I'd ever dealt with a dead animal in that way, cutting that, and you have to be able to stomach it. It's not an easy thing for some people, but. And then the person who was working with us, who was kind of an expert on butchering the animal, was hiding, getting the hides off, using the hides, stuff like that. And she said, "Wow, it seems like you've done this before." And then I realized, like, well, maybe there's something inside of my body that has some sort of genetic codified memory that just knows how to butcher an animal. Because it's not self-explanatory. There's a certain way that you cut through it without butchering it, no pun intended, but without screwing it up. And yeah, so that's an example, is like, what hidden talents or hidden abilities do we have that have been codified through our ancestry that we're just not using, or we're not exposed to the proper environment to remember that aspect of ourselves. Because one of the things about genes is they kind of are a certain type of memory. If you think about it, genes learn from experience and they store that experience as a perpetual way of being, and they continue to mutate and change and evolve. And they also they can transform, they can gain new adaptations after a very long time. But yeah, within our bodies, we have thousands and thousands of years of information, i.e., the collective unconscious. Or Anthony Stevens, who's a Jungian analyst, calls it the phylogenetic psyche. Phylogenetic means the wide range of species or interspecies shared genes, while ontogenetic is more of the specific manifestation of a human genome, which is more unique. But anyways, we share a lot of information, and through our ancestry, who knows what we pick up. So when you do something new, you essentially have to factor in, like, who knows what's going to come out of you, what sides of your personality are going to come to the forefront. Anyways, okay. Michael says, I'm liking Strachan more and more. I feel that many of the postmodern Freudians, Lacan, Foucault, use the term unconscious to make people to believe that things about themselves that are not true. Oh yeah, you can use the word unconscious to push a postmodern narrative, because you can say you're an unconscious racist. Wow. Strachan also looks at unconscious as an excuse. Oh, I didn't do it. It was my unconscious. That's the other reason he doesn't like the word unconscious, because it can slough off personal responsibility. I wasn't conscious. It's not my fault that I acted that way. That's not the way that Jung used it, okay, to be fair, and Strachan uses it in somewhat of a different way. But yeah, so that's one of his criticisms, is that it can be used in that way to slough off responsibility and make excuses, which is, that's no good. Boop. Okay. I think I'm going to do a book review soon. What do you think about book reviews, guys? I read this book in the spring. It's called Archetype Revisited by Anthony Stevens, who I just mentioned. And he is a psychiatrist. And I think he's a biologist, but let me see. He's a Jungian analyst and a psychiatrist. That's right. And he is a very what he did is he took Jung's work and he updated it based on current evolutionary science. Really good book. I highly recommend it. And he talks about the father archetype, the mother archetype, archetypes and experience. What's the archetypal essence of a family? What does it mean to be a part of a family unit? And then he goes into a lot of attachment theory. He spent a lot of time with, I think his name was Michael Bobley, who developed the attachment theory, and he spent a lot of time studying with that gentleman. And it's a great book. Highly recommend it if you're into that sort of thing. And speaking of good books, I'm also checking out this one, The Essential Vedanta. It's a kind of a history of the Vedantic philosophy in India. The reason I picked it up is because I wanted to check out, I'm all over the place today, so forgive me. I wanted to check out the word ego because as far as I could tell, it has two strands of birth, essentially. Freud developed the word ego, as far as I understand, as a term for managing the subconscious and the superego. So ego was in between the subconscious and the superego as kind of a managing, mediating factor between, how do I show up in the world so I can get my instincts met, subconscious to Freud, and also please this big superego, humanity, society, expectations, cultural norms. How do I balance that? Well, I have this ego that helps me create personas and manage my experience and learn how to get my needs met while also cooperating and competing in between societal structures. And so I looked at that. Okay, that's Freud's definition. Then we look at the Eastern Hindu ancient ego, which was the word ahamkara. And ahamkara basically meant limited self. So to the Vedantic tradition, ego was simply the fact that you are a separate entity onto yourself with your own identity. That's it. All the negative terms that get used as ego today have been added since then, like you're too arrogant, too prideful, too selfish. All it simply meant in the Eastern tradition was separate self. I am an individual. That's it. Now, of course, in the goal of Hinduism was union, and yoga, for those of you who don't know, means to yoke, to unify with the greatness, the oneness of the universe. So to the Hindu tradition, being an individual is great, but the ultimate goal is unity, where you actually lose yourself in the great mystery of the universe. You become one with Brahman. You merge with the one. And that's why the great gurus and great yogis and stuff of that tradition had this presentation as if they didn't really have an ego or an identity. They were enlightened. They were one with all things, and their body was just a vessel for that oneness. So that's a real Eastern thought. In Western society, we focus more on the morality and the ethic of the individual and how the individual makes responsible choices in order to earn their passageway into a greater being, a heaven, or whatever. It's more about keeping yourself in alignment with an ethical and moral acting in the world. Now, in Hinduism, they had rules. Don't act this way. Don't act that way. It'd be like avoid sexual deviance, do these things, do those things, because if you do that, then your body will be more prepared for the oneness that God will bring onto you, or Brahman, the greatness of the universe. It's very interesting, the differences between the Hindu Vedantic line of philosophy and then our Western Judeo-Christian philosophy. It's very, very interesting. All right, back to the comments. Okay. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, basically, David says, I like to think about those pattern pictures of the 90s like it Malrats just because you don't see a sailboat doesn't mean it's there. That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. Um, Michael says ego is Latin for I. Okay, there we go. There's another strand that I didn't pick up on. So ego. So it goes ego and Latin. Okay, so it's similar to the. See what I mean though? See how we've taken that and made it to be something so loaded with negative terminology? We've taken ego and made it into a selfish term or a negative term, which is, maybe that's what it's supposed to be now, but, we say like, oh, he has a big ego. Okay, we've got ego Latin. Wow. Okay. I didn't even know that. Thank you, Michael. I always learn something new. Okay. Dave, I'm going to come back to what David said. Just because you don't see the sailboat doesn't mean it isn't there. Yeah. I get what you're meaning by that. I like that. And I think that goes back into the whole conversation about the word unconscious, right? Michael says, I like the pre-psychoanalytic term, personally, the sublime. David says, there was a guy who talked about unlocking maximum human potential, and he stated it is a consequence of flow states. Stephen Coulter was his name. The guy who discusses flow states in those moments of hyper engagement. Yes, that I agree with that, because being in a flow state is essentially you're in the most meaningful possible state of living, and the more that we're in that trance, that flow. Somebody explained it to me really well. Okay, so there's two primary states of being. There's trance and flow, and then there's complex, which is, in Jungian terms, that's when you are, in a psychological. Well, there's negative complexes, and then there's just complexes. Let's go negative complex. You're in a psychological trigger where you are not fully attending to the present moment. You're not in the flow. You're interrupted by fear, anxiety, anger, lust, whatever. Something interrupts you and takes you out of the flow state and creates a phenomenon of dysregulation. So there's that trance state, and then we get pulled out of that trance state and we get into a complex, and that's our life. Now, Jung thought the more that you were living your purpose, the less neurotic you would be, the less neurotic complexes would come to you. So if you identified and lived out a deeply purposeful way of being, whether it's through your career or through attending to your family or through your hobbies and passions, if you were living a deeply empowered purpose, then the neurotic states of complex would lessen and lessen and lessen, and you'd be more in that trance-like flow state. So that's something I've been paying very close attention to in my personal life. When am I in the flow? I've been noticing. I've been keeping close track of this. And when does it get interrupted? And what interrupts it? And I've identified some key things. Fear, anxiety about the future, lack of direction in the present moment, lack of focus on a goal can take me out of it, or focus on an object of my attention. Obviously, any sort of anger or getting tripped up in resentment takes me out of it. And I've just been watching that and then seeing when I'm in it. And things that help me stay in it, intermittent fasting has been helpful, exercise, meditation, journaling, and planning my day so that I have something to focus on, whether it be work or a object of reflection or education, having a goal to move towards. And one of the things that is important, Singinger, I think it was Michael Singinger, someone's last name, a Dr. Singinger created this three-layered model. There is the comfort zone, the learning zone. There are three circles. And then there is the panic zone. Flow state occurs in the learning zone. So you're not comfortable, but you're not panicking. You're not like pushing yourself so hard and so far that you're totally out of sync and you go into shutdown mode. So you want to be like, for that flow state, you want to be right on the edge of your abilities, but you also don't want you don't want to panic. And if you're too comfortable, then you're not going to be in that learning zone. You're not going to be in the flow. So apparently, the flow is the result of pushing yourself just hard enough that you're just on the edge of your seat. You're just able to manage the experience. But you're uncertain. You feel like you could kind of tumble off and fall at any moment, and that's the sweet spot. That's living on the edge. That's the razor's edge that we all got to walk to stay in that connected, alert state. The problem with the comfort zone is that there's no focus. There's no need to bring yourself to that heightened state of awareness and being, so you get stagnant. The problem with the panic zone is it throws your nervous system into fight, flight, or freeze, and you don't learn anything, and then it makes it even harder to continue to make progress because we've all been in situations where we were in over our heads and it didn't help because we thought we could do more than we could, or we put ourselves in a position where we just weren't ready, anything like that. I often use the analogy of people who want to start going to the gym and they haven't been to the gym in like months, maybe years. And then they go to the gym for the first time and they just grind it out for 2 hours. They're just they're pushing hard. And they just beat the shit out of themselves. They're just exhausted. And then they go home, they're worthless for the next 4 days. And then they don't go to the gym again for weeks. Because they put themselves into overdrive, and then they just like had this negative memory of, well, last time I went to the gym, I couldn't move for a week. And it's like, well, maybe if you would have just gone to the gym for 30 minutes, that would have been a good start, and you could have worked your way up to the 2-hour session. But yeah, so that's a good example. Anyways. Okay. Let's see here. Grim. Hey Grizz says, have you heard of the phrase amygdala hijack? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, you get there's another word, downshifting, where you shift from your cerebral cortex down into your limbic system, and you get into an emotional trigger. That's another good way of explaining flow states. I mean, when you're in the flow state, your prefrontal cortex is highly activated, the cerebral cortex is working, and then when you're triggered or you break that flow state, essentially you're downshifted into the emotional centers of the brain, where you're either in anxiety or anger or freeze or whatever. There's all these different responses that happen within, and the amygdala is kind of like, they call it the watchdog of the brain. Like, it's kind of like the alarm system saying like, hey, like something's wrong, and so it sends information through the hypothalamus and the hippocampus, and there's all this complex mechanisms that creates that emotional trigger to tell your nervous system, hey, there's a problem here. So if the amygdala is like, hey, somebody's about to attack us, it's going to push that information into the hypothalamus through the thalamus, and the hypothalamus is going to say, oh shit, like, do we need to, like, should I send, what hormones need to be released here? Should we fight? Should we run? Or in some cases, the thalamus just doesn't mobilize. It's responsible for mobilizing those neurons and sending them through. And that's what the freeze response. There's no action. It's just like there's no information sequencing. So it's just a thalamic freeze. And that would happen in situations where it's like, well, I just totally don't know how to respond to this situation. I don't know how to fight. I don't know how to run. And so, that happens to rape victims often, the freeze. It's like the way that your body deals is just shutting down. So, yeah, those amygdala. And the problem with the amygdala hijack is that it's obviously an ancient and useful survival mechanism that we need. The problem is when we bring it to situations where we don't need it anymore. Like if you're trying to have a negotiation at work, whether it's for a raise or something, something essential, and you get amygdala hijack, you're not using your frontal lobes for problem solving and planning. You're not using the global capacities of your brain to meet the situation, and you're now in that emotional and survival response. So you're basically screwed. You're not coming to the situation with the best of what you got. And so a lot of times the work in a transformational lens, like in working with clients or doing group work or just personal growth, is to get yourself functioning more and more in the more evolved layers of the brain, and training yourself to regulate your own limbic system so that you can soothe and understand what's necessary when. If your heart rate's going up when you're talking to your boss, there's a good chance that your wiring's all mixed up. It thinks it's in a survival situation, and it's not actually helping because it's just, and it might feel like a survival situation, and who knows, it might actually be, because if you get fired, there's repercussions to that. But it's not actually helping you deal with the situation in a cerebral way. I hope that all made sense. Flow, Thomas says flow, and you also said, I'll start with the first one. I'm a country boy now living in a big city, so who knows what will turn on. Hey, that's interesting. Who knows? Yeah, I'm curious to find out. Thomas says flow equals right place, right time. Yeah, I've heard Peterson say that a lot, and I really like that. Then you say, okay, but why did I do? I need to do more. What did I do? I need to do more of that. Oh, interesting. Um, there need to be significant consequences for failure to push flow states. That's a really interesting point, Longstone, and I think that there's something to that for sure, because if there's not a consequence for failure, then it's not going to mobilize us to be as focused. It's like when there's consequences, it demands our attention. When I was a kid, I learned how to longboard, and I would just bomb these massive hills, and a lot of times I wouldn't be wearing a helmet, and not that I would suggest that, but the the rush and the amount of focus that it would force me to athletically, mobilize was just incredible. It was incredible, and I think that that's been my experience with most sports that I've learned. It's interesting though, Longstone, because you can also access a flow state in things like reading, writing, and meditation. So I'm not sure if that would bridge over to those states, because you can access those flows. For example, cooking. Chefs often report it where the consequences aren't quite as high. Maybe the person won't like the food or they won't like the essay you wrote, but that's different than I'm gonna fall and I'm gonna break my collarbone. Which happened to me, but anyways, so yeah, we have to negotiate and come to a conclusion about what are the consequences that would be dire in situations where flow is more nuanced and less extreme. I'd be curious what you think about that. David says, good stuff, man. What happened to the Jordan Peterson on cocaine video? It's on private right now. I can put that one back up because you're the second person who's asked about that today. So obviously that's a big hit. I put some of the old Peterson videos on private because the algorithm is I'll put it back up. I'll put the Peterson on cocaine back up. The algorithm essentially is giving us a hard time with our own videos, and it's only promoting the Peterson content. Now, obviously, it's because he's Jordan Peterson. But because his content is so widely available on YouTube, what I wanted to do is see if we could be more solidified and unique in our own brand. So I left a couple of the Peterson videos up, but I also want to experiment with this for a little bit and see what happens if we just build around more of our own content. I left some of the Peterson videos up that are us responding. We play a Peterson clip and then respond to it. But yeah, I was struggling with that because that's what's driving the subs up. The subscribers is the Peterson content. And that when Andrew Jokum ran this channel, that's how he ran it. He had a lot of Peterson videos up. It was a Jordan Peterson channel. And then he would talk about how he was sorting himself out, and he would give vlogs and reports and things like that. I'm finding for what I'm trying to do here with Mercury that it's creating a bit of an issue as far as building our own audience. Now, that being said, I'm open to feedback, and of course, I understand if some people are upset that some of those videos are gone now. However, I think you will find that his videos are so widely disseminated throughout the internet that you shouldn't have an issue really finding that content. It should be basically everywhere at this point. There's many channels putting it out. So that's the reasoning behind it, and yeah, I do apologize if that comes as a frustration to anyone, but that's kind of the choice that I'm making for right now. All right, so and Mercury is on board with that. So I'm putting the Peterson on cocaine video on public right now, and yeah, I think you're right. I think it's good to keep that one up because it's a favorite. It seems like people come back to it a lot. So, anyways, all right. Let's get back to the. Michael said, and did I read? Yeah, you said good stuff, man, David. Okay. Michael says, what gets hijacked, the prefrontal cortex by the amygdala or the amygdala by other people? Culture, hypnosis. Well, the amygdala doesn't get. It's not that the prefrontal cortex. Let me think this through. The amygdala takes the energy from the frontal lobes. So the activity, the brain activity is more active within the limbic system in that triggered state because you're trying to figure out how to survive that moment. So you need all the energy. If you were getting chased by a tiger, you wouldn't want to be in planning on your Google Calendar or complex problem solving. It's very simple. I need to use my brain to escape. So my cerebellum will be active for the coordination and things like that, but I'm not necessarily going to need those regular aspects of the frontal lobe. So that's why there's a reason why you shift out of one brain state into another. It's to really get the most out of the chances of survival. So like I said, the problem is when you bring that to a situation like you're talking about, like getting triggered by something, like you see a Facebook post and it triggers an amygdala limbic response. It's like that's a waste of energy because you're not getting chased by a tiger, and you're not in the higher developed problem solving meditative states or planning of the prefrontal cortex. You're in a very rudimentary ancient circuit that it's just not necessary for Twitter and Facebook. You know what I mean? So it's like need to retrain that so that you bring what's necessary to the situation, not a non-necessary triggered state. Longstone says, kitchens are high stress, high stakes, losing business. Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, that's a good point. But not life or death. When you've hit a flow state repeated, repeatedly, it can be easier to repeat or recognize when you're close. Yeah, and I mean, I've experienced the flow states on the live streams, in interviews, in, like I said, writing. Uh, so yeah, I think, or for example, playing hacky sack. Like, there's a lot of ways that I've activated it. I think that it's easier. My personal opinion is that it's easier to activate when you are, you know, in a high stakes situation. So I think that's a very good point. And I think that that might be the easiest way to learn it, rock climbing, things like that, because then you have your body has to do it, and then you can abstract based on those memories and attempt to continue to reproduce that based on memory rather than needing to be in a high stakes situation to reproduce it. I think if you're disciplined enough and you know how to control your consciousness to a certain extent, then the likelihood that you're going to be able to access a flow state without too many external triggers is higher. And I think that we see that in the studies on Buddhist monks and monitoring their brain activity and things like that. We see these states of being just happening through simple sitting. And my guess, Longstone, is based on your training, which I'm roughly acquainted with. You're in that line of discipline where you can activate these things on demand. So that's where I stand on that. But I'm open to being wrong about that, or making revisions to that. Okay, what else, everybody? Oh, I gotta grab a book off my bookshelf to show you real quick. All right. This guy wrote this book called Flow. I think he's a fairly world famous psychologist, but it's good. It talks about the importance of having a goal that you're working towards, the importance of the discipline to continue putting yourself in a situation where you need a high level of focus. And he talks about, why aren't, people aren't designed to be in stagnant states of excessive comfort. And when we are in these stagnant states of excessive comfort, the likelihood of us being happy, and he does use the word happiness, is lower, because we're not pushing ourselves to the, let's call it, the neurochemical balance that would give us an optimal psychological experience. And so that, I thought that was fascinating. I mean, if you think about, well, from an evolutionary perspective, which I like, check this out. We've spent thousands and thousands of years, obviously tens of thousands, millions of years as organisms evolving, and we've had to fight our way. We've had to struggle forward. And for most of human history, life was not easy. So we had to meet constant trials and tribulations and struggles in order to survive and get through day to day. Well, I mean, now let's look at today. I mean, I'm sitting here in front of split screens with headphones on, drinking a coffee out of a paper cup, and the heat's on, the lights are on, I got water upstairs and food in the fridge. I'm not hunting today. I'm not gathering plants. I'm not, for all intents and purposes, the likelihood of some sort of wilderness threat is low. Like, no predators are lurking as far as I know. I mean, obviously, if you go far enough out, you'll find something. But the only things I need to be afraid of are potentially the people around me that could be dangerous. But I live in a safe enough neighborhood, so mathematically speaking, the odds of something bad happening today are low. of Western medical doctors. Lifespans are longer now than ever, as far as we know. So, I mean, we didn't evolve to be that comfortable. It's really a miracle if you think about it. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse because we are at a time where we have the capacity to worry about things and to dream about things that for most of human history were not, we're not there as an option. And it also it's a curse in a big way because we now are at a stage where we have the existential burden of having to figure out what to do with our free time, how to deal with the fact that our basic needs are met, and what does it mean to be human when you're not just getting through day to day. And I'm not talking about everybody, okay? Obviously, I'm aware that in most of us watching this on YouTube are getting basic needs met. Otherwise, why are you watching me on YouTube? You should be, out trying to figure that out, obviously. So I'm aware that the whole world aren't experiencing these benefits, but it's pretty amazing that a lot of us are. So, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it either. So you're saying Shik sent me high. Michael Shik sent me high. Is that it? Macau, hold on, I want to make sure I'm getting this name right. Mahal Shik sent me high. Yeah, I mean, pretty cool. Here, I'm gonna read a random paragraph out of this. Okay, just random. I don't even know if it's gonna make sense, if it's gonna be any context for it. It is for this reason that courage, resilience, perseverance, mature defense, or transformational coping, the dissipative structures of the mind, are so essential. Without them, we would be constantly suffering through the random bombardment of stray psychological meteorites. On the other hand, if we do develop such positive strategies, most negative events can be at least neutralized and then possibly even used as challenges that will help us make the self stronger and more complex. Transformational skills usually developed by late adolescence. Young children and early teens still depend to a large extent on supportive social network to buffer them against things that go wrong. When a blow falls on a younger teenager, even something as trivial as a bad grade, a pimple erupting on the chin, or a friend ignoring him at school, it seems to him as if the world is about to end. There is no longer any purpose in life. Positive feedback from other people usually picks his mood up in a matter of minutes. A smile, a phone call, a good song captures his attention, distracting him from worries and restoring order in the mind. We have learned from the experience sampling method studies that a healthy adolescent stays depressed on the average for only a half an hour. An adult takes on the average twice as long to recover from bad moods. That's fascinating. That's interesting. What does he mean by transformational skills here? Sooner or later, everybody will have to confront events that contradict his goals: disappointment, severe illness, financial reversal, and eventually the inevitability of one's death. All right. Anyways, a good book. I recommend it. I love the idea of the science of the flow states and staying connected to purpose. I think it's just that's what's meaningful, is being in that state of heightened awareness and heightened functioning. And I think it's a wide spectrum. I think flow, to back to Longstone's point, flow is used in such a blanket way. And why I say that's back to Longstone's point is, like, he's talking about the flow, that is very immediate. We're pushed into it because of the consequences. But the word flow gets used to explain an umbrella of optimal states of being and awareness. So, I mean, you can be in flow while you're relaxing on the beach. You can be in flow while you're performing at work. You can be in flow while you're skateboarding or whatever. And I think that's an important point to make, because it's not just one brain state that just covers. It's optimal states of being that probably vary in their neurochemical attributes, but I would suggest that there are the similarities that the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system are activated in such a way that creates the ideal state of focus, tension, and relaxation. There seems to be that almost archetypal balance in flow states between tension and masculine focus and surrender and relaxation. And the composition of both of those things creates this proper state of being, this tension, this robust, amazing experience that comes out of that archetypal balance. That's my assessment. So really it is the yin yang operating through us. A lot of time marathon runners will report that after a while they're not running. Running is just happening. So in Taoism, that's called Wu Wei, effortless action. In Hinduism, there is a other way of putting it. What is it? Everything gets done, but nobody's doing. So it's this way of like actions are just happening, and the self-identity around them kind of dissipates, and you just lose yourself in the experience. And if you've ever run, you know that for a while it feels like you're efforting your way forward, and then if you stick with it, then the running just happens, and you're kind of along for the ride. I would say that's akin to a flow state as well. And by the way, it reminds me of I haven't studied Aristotle enough, but it reminds me of the idea of the unmoved mover. But I don't know if that's too far of a stretch. I'm going to look that up. I'm no Aristotle expert. Let's see what that means. Wikipedia, and feel free to fill in if anybody else knows more about that. That which moves without being moved, the cause of all of the motion in the universe, as implicit in the name, the unmoved mover moves things, but it itself is not moved by any prior action. There's a real Buddhist feel to that, or a Taoist even, where things happen, but the mover is unmoved. The witness consciousness, they say in meditation, the ability to watch what's happening as a removed observer while you're also doing it. While it's all happening, there's this witness part of your consciousness that's almost unmoved, and that's kind of the goal of a lot of meditation, is to identify more with the part of you that's aware rather than the part of you that's acting and doing. Interesting stuff. All right, what time do we got here? All right, I'm gonna have to get out of here. So, anyways, thank you all very much. I really appreciate the questions and the fun topics, and I hope you all have an awesome day. And yeah, I'll be back as soon as I can. I'm gonna stop the stream and I'll be right there.